Welcome back, Sebastian. Here's time for my power rankings for the 2025 Austrian Grand Prix. Unfortunately, didn't have time yesterday for doing, a full review of the race. Life gets in the way, that kind of thing. But I still have time to do my power ranking. So, starting off with number 20, I think not too many surprises about who the drivers in the bottom two are going to be. After that, I think, gets a little bit more tricky. But for sure, number 20, I have Kimi Antonelli qualifies ninth, out-qualified by his teammate George Russell by about half a second on a lap as short as Austria. That's, about 6.5 tenths, getting close to 7 tenths on, some longer tracks are like, a minute and a half. So yeah, not ideal there for Antonelli. Again, qualifying performances, I think, have been a bit of an issue. These are tracks in theory he should know pretty well. He's done them in F2. A lot of these tracks in Europe, he's done in Formula Regional as well. But it really feels like, the qualifying performance so far this year really peaked in Miami, and it's kind of gotten worse since then, which is kind of not what you want to see in your rookie driver. And then race very, very short, only lasts to turn 3, locks up the rear of the car, loses control, and slams into Max Verstappen, taking them both out of the race. And of course, he's been handed a 3-place grid penalty for the next race in Silverstone this coming weekend. So I think not a ton of debate about putting Antonelli at the bottom. I guess really the only debate is whether or not he's 19th or 20th, because the driver in 19th also had a very woeful weekend, and that is Yuki Tsunoda. Qualifies 18th, out-qualified by his teammate Max Verstappen by 2.6 tenths of a second. A qualifying gap that I think really flatters Tsunoda. Verstappen only sets one run in Q1 towards the beginning of the session. Tsunoda, I think 2 timed laps, and of course that second one would have been at the very end. Track evolution probably add 6-7 tenths of a second there, and so that 2.5 tenth gap is really closer to like 9 tenths a second. So not ideal for Tsunoda there. And then in the race, just really slow pace. A really clumsy mistake clattering into the side of Carl Pinto, spinning him around at turn 4, I believe. Gets himself a 10-place grid penalty, broken front wing, ends up 2 laps down on the leaders, the 2 McLarens, and this is a car that's not that much slower than the 2 McLarens. I know the McLarens blew everyone out of water this past weekend, but realistically, Tsunoda driving a Red Bull should be on the lead lap, or at least be very, very close to not being lapped, I should say. And there was a driver, in fact, the driver he replaced, who's now at Racing Bulls, finished on the lead lap in the Racing Bulls, which is in theory a slower car. Whether or not that's actually the case, that's yet to be seen. But at least this past weekend, Tsunoda, very, very poor weekend, ends up 2 laps down. For me, really reminiscent of Gasly's 2019 Austria performance, where his teammate Verstappen wins the Grand Prix and Gasly ends up getting lapped, and that was of course, I think, his 3rd last or 4th last Grand Prix for Red Bull. I don't think Tsunoda's going to get replaced. I think they're just going to see this out to the end of the season, just because there's not really, they know that the car's a massive handful. There's no point in putting anyone else in the car. But I do think 2026 very open-ended. What Verstappen does, I think, will dictate a lot. But again, they do have a big decision to make on what they do for 2026. Now, moving on to 18, a driver who didn't even start the Grand Prix, that is Carlos Sainz. Qualifies 19th, out-qualified by his teammate Albon by 4 tenths of a second. In the race, doesn't start, stalls on the grid, and then has some kind of brake failure, brake fire. Brakes basically catch fire in the pit lane, and he is unable to start the Grand Prix. Not sure if there was some kind of damage or if he got impeded on his final lap in Q1. But again, pretty big gap in qualifying on a very short lap. And again, didn't really have anything in the race to really redeem himself and potentially push him up a little bit higher up. Number 7, perennial driver who's near the bottom of this list, and that is Lance Stroll. So for Stroll, qualifies in 16th, out-qualified by his teammate by 1.3 tenths of a second. To be honest, qualifying gap not so bad. I know it's a short lap, but again, a bit disappointing for Stroll, given he was ahead of Alonso pretty much all through practice, I should say. In the race, really just anonymous, pretty slow pace. Comes home to a 14th place finish, 7 places behind his teammate Alonso, who I will also admit is probably closer to being a pensioner than than he is in age to some of the rookies on this year's grid. Now, number 16, Franco Colapinto. Colapinto qualifies 14th. Qualifying continues to be a big weakness of his. He'll qualify by 4.4 tenths of a second, but does get himself up into Q2, which I think is kind of what should be expected for where the Alpine is right now. I think getting into Q3 consistently, at least, I think is a big ask. But I do think, at this point with the Alpine is, Q3 should be the bare minimum, and that's kind of what he's doing, but he's not showing really the flashes of speed that we saw quite a bit during his time at Williams. The race was kind of a disaster, not entirely Colapinto's fault. I think Gasly as well, you could see in the sister car. The race pace for the Alpine is pretty terrible. Probably the slowest car on Sunday, I would say. And so Colapinto kind of just went backwards in the race. Also had a bit of a clumsy moment where he basically was fighting Tsunoda while basically getting lapped by Piastri. Almost puts Piastri in the wall. That could have had massive implications on the title fight. Luckily, Piastri, very cool head, keeps it planted, keeps going. And again, I don't think it's we can't blame Colapinto too much in the sense that, he didn't even know he was there, of course, wasn't malicious. And we know that F1 mirrors are not the most useful things in the world. But that being said, probably should have had some awareness at least that, saw the blue flags, know that he was getting lapped. No, last thing you want to do is interfere and basically help determine the outcome of a race when you're, racing in 14th, 15th. So all in all, not a great weekend for Colapinto. Alpine have confirmed that, he will be at the team longer than that initial 5-race stint that was announced. How much longer yet to be seen? I would say probably until the end of the season. If the performances don't pick up, though, wouldn't be surprised if he gets replaced for 2026. And again, there's rumors already out there that, Bottas could be a candidate for that second Alpine seat alongside Gasly for 2026. So I do think there's pressure on him. And again, that's always going to be the case with drivers early in their F1 careers. I mean, later as well, but I think especially, early on when you don't really have a track record of being, a proven driver. All right, number 15. Is Isaac Hadjar. A bit of a disappointing weekend for the French driver. Definitely, overshadowed by his teammate. And I think given what we saw from his teammate, kind of showed that, Hadjar did underperform by quite a bit this weekend. Qualifies 13th, out-qualified by his teammate Lawson by 1.8 tenths of a second. Comes home to finish 12th in the race, but really aggressive strategy, pitting right out during the initial safety car after the Verstappen-Antonelli incident, but not able to make the tires last to a one-stop strategy, which is what his teammate was able to do. So that second stop puts him back down through the field, and comes home to a 12th place finish. Number 14, I have Oliver Behrman. So for Behrman, a tough weekend, qualified in 15th, out-qualified his teammate Ocon by 1.4 tenths of a second. I think qualifying speed has been really good the last 3 or 4 races. And I think, the fact that he's, out-qualifying a driver who has, 8 years of F1 experience, I would say is like an average qualifier. Again, he's not a great, top 8, probably not even top 10 qualifier, I would say, for Ocon. But still, an average qualifier, much better than a Stroll, for example. And again, that's a pretty solid benchmark, so I think Behrman's doing a really good job in terms of one-lap pace. The race pace, I think, again, the races like this where, Ocon qualify a couple positions ahead of him and finish ahead of him in the race shows that I think in race pace there is a little bit there, but that's to be expected for a rookie. But the raw speed, I think, is there for Behrman, and I think, a little bit more luck and he'll have a little bit better race pace, a little bit better consistency with tire management. I think he can have string together a couple of really good weekends. I think the Haas, they're probably the worst car in terms of one-lap pace, so I think that's going to always be a struggle, especially for a driver like Behrman, where you can see there's a little bit of a gap there in terms of race pace. If the car is not able to start, well into the top 10 or even in the top 10, odds are, unless you have a whole bunch of incidents, crazy strategy, it's going to be really hard to finish in the top 10 if your race pace is, a little bit below average. All right, number 13, I should say, is Alex Albon. Driver who suffered a pretty miserable weekend, but I thought, had good flashes of speed there. And again, not really his fault that he ends up retiring for, I think, the 3rd weekend in a row. So qualifies 12th, which I think for the Williams right now, it's been a bit of a weird European stretch of the season. It feels like they've definitely taken a step backwards from that initial 5-6 races of the season, where, at that stage they were, almost easily qualifying in the top 10. But here, Albon qualifies 12th. Again, pretty big margin on his teammate Sainz, so again, that's a positive for him. In the race, really good start, gets himself up into the 6th, 7th place, I believe. But then, unfortunately, has to retire with some kind of mechanical issue, so a bit unfortunate for him there. Now, number 12 is Esteban, or Ocon, I should say. Qualified 17th, again, not great in terms of one-lap pace, and that holds him back from being further up on this list, despite the fact that, he had a really good recovery drive. And then in the race, finishes in 10th place. So again, I think really solid race pace. Qualifying pace, I think, is the fact that he's being out-qualified by a rookie is a little bit of a cause for concern. And I think, obviously, for next year, it's not a big deal. He'll be racing for Haas in 2026. But, if this trend continues, Behrman continues to out-qualify him, eventually that race pace will come. And I think there will be real questions about why should we recontract you for 2027 if you're being out-qualified by a driver who has, much less experience than you. So again, I do think that there's going to be a bit of pressure on Ocon for this next, 10 months, next year or so in Formula One. But again, for Ocon, I think he has been a driver who historically has taken a bit of time to get up to speed when he's changed teams. Like I remember in 2020 driving for Renault, not a great year qualifying. Again, he had like a 2/10 gap to Ricciardo. I know at that point Ricciardo was still at his prime, so to be honest, 2/10 is not that big of a deal. But again, qualifying was a big struggle that year, and it seems like again this year, first year at Haas, it continues to be a struggle. All right, number 11, I'm going to go with Nico Hülkenberg, qualified 20th. Not a great qualifying session, qualifies dead last, out-qualified by his rookie teammate Bortoleto by 4.8 tenths of a second, but excellent race, excellent recovery drive, finishes P9, I think really highlighting the pace that's in that Sauber car. Again, not trying to, dismiss Hülkenberg's great performance on Sunday. I think, again, really good job there, really, backing up why they signed him that 2-year contract or even 3-year contract. Not sure on the exact details, despite his age. But I think, he's done a really, really good job this year. And I think, he's been the perfect signing for Sauber. But again, similar to Ocon, underperforming in qualifying does hold him back a little bit on my power rankings, which is why she's not in the top 10. So, number 10, I'm going to go with Pierre Gasly, a bit of an opposite situation in the previous two drivers. Thought really good performance in qualifying. Excellent, lap in Q2. Q3, a little bit scruffy again, does that 720 at the end of the session, which basically screws up a whole bunch of other drivers' laps. But again, qualifying pace really good. Qualifies Colapinto by 4.410, which is exactly what he needs to be doing. In the race, I think really struggled. The race pace in the Alpine, not great. Apparently he also picked up floor damage as well, so the balance of the car was awful. And then comes home to a 13th place finish. But I don't think really his fault. I think the fact that you had both him and Colapinto both kind of fall backwards in the race, in a race where you had two drivers who were definitely expected to finish in the top 10. Plus, I guess Albon as well, given his starting position and where he ended up after that first lap incident. Those are 3 positions there that they basically gained for free. And so the fact that you had, Colapinto dropped a position, Gasly dropped 3 positions, really showed that I think the Alpine's race pace, not very good right now, probably the worst in the field. So it's not entirely down to their true drivers. All right, number 10 is a driver who's, again, really difficult weekend to assess. Qualifies 7th, so again, looking at that on paper, looks like a pretty bad result, but was unable to set final lap time at the end of Q3 because of Gasly's aforementioned 3.720 spin. It qualified Tsunoda, like I said, by 2/10, but again, not really a representative gap. The Red Bull looked like to be an absolutely horrific car this weekend, just in terms of car setup, balance. Verstappen was complaining even that the car was much worse than in practice, and even through qualifying, it felt like it was getting worse. I think without that, not necessarily without the qualifying, because I think even from 7th, he probably could have picked up at least a couple of positions. But without, the contact with Antonelli, I think probably maybe a podium might have been off the cards, but I think P4, P5 maybe, was probably pretty realistic. It's hard to say. Mercedes had absolutely horrific race pace, so I think P5 really likely. P4, Hamilton, maybe. I think he could have finished there. And again, P3, again, a little bit of a question mark, but I don't think there was no way he would have gotten into the top 2. So real unknown for Verstappen this weekend, but I am going to put him just into the positive. But again, hard to really put him any higher than that. Number 8, Fernando Alonso, really solid Grand Prix again for the Spaniard, qualifies 11th, out-qualified Stroll by 1.3 tenths of a second. In the race, really good job with a one-stop strategy, similar to Lawson, and finishes a solid P7 on the road, and he now ties Stroll's points tally for the season, and that's basically just in a 3-race span where he's finished 9th, 7th, and 7th. So looking like, and highly likely in the coming races, that he'll get a couple more points finishes and he'll be ahead of his teammate, which again, based on how he's performed relative to Stroll, is exactly how it should be. Now, number 7, Lewis Hamilton. I think a really quiet race for the British driver. Qualified 4th, out-qualified by Leclerc by 900ths of a second. Then in the Grand Prix, finishes in 4th. Really quiet race. Again, you have that initial safety car period, but after that, not much. Finishes 10 seconds behind his teammate there. Didn't want to do the second stop, wanted to just stay on the tires. So again, you had another disagreement between himself and his radio team. So I think it was a solid weekend for Hamilton. But again, Leclerc showed that there was a bit more pace there, and thus a little bit more performance. So I think 7th is a decent spot for Hamilton. Now, moving into the top row, number 6 is George Russell. So for George, qualified 5th, finished 5th. Again, the race pace for the team was absolutely horrific. Russell finished, I think, 4 or 5 seconds ahead of Lawson in the Racing Bulls, and finished, let me think of what was it. I think he finished like 40 or so seconds behind Hamilton's Ferrari. So I think that really shows the relative gaps of where, the Mercedes was compared to the front runners, compared to the midfield. So really, really bad weekend for Mercedes, one of their worst weekends this season. Again, don't really blame Russell entirely for that. I think it was clear with the high temperatures that, and that was something I said in my preview, that was likely going to make this weekend really difficult. There's quite a few high-speed corners in Sector 2 and in Sector 3, and that just means that we were overheating as a big problem. And so I thought, this weekend was always going to be a bit tough for them with those hot temperatures. But for Russell, I think he did a decent job, and yeah, he'll be moving on to his home race, British Grand Prix, hoping for a much better result. Now, number 5 is Oscar Piastri. So for Piastri, qualifies 3rd, out-qualified by his teammate Norris by 5.2 tenths of a second. Qualifying gap much bigger than I think it actually was. Like Verstappen, another driver who had his lap basically ruined at the end of Q3. Without that, likely 1/10, 2/10 gap, which is still quite big, and definitely shows, I think, in one lap pace, Norris was the much better of the McLaren drivers this weekend. So again, I think there's very fair reason there just to, dock Piastri a bit quite there. In terms of the race pace was honestly pretty good. First stint was good, but I know one thing I remember Norris said during his post-race interview was that DRS is so powerful here that it was pretty easy, or at least in his words, it was pretty easy for Piastri just to stay within DRS range. I found it interesting that once they kind of diverged on strategy, Piastri stayed out quite a bit longer. When he basically came out like 5 seconds behind Norris, that gap stayed around 5 seconds. Second stint though, definitely he was chasing in, closing in towards the end. So I think, really good race pace there. And again, perhaps a little bit better than Norris. Hard to say, Norris was probably, holding back a little bit just to, for reliability purposes, didn't need to push too much. But at the same time, I think, an okay race by Piastri, but there was definitely more pace there. All right, number 4, Gabriel Bortoleto finally scores his first points in F1. Really, really strong overall weekend. He's had quite a few weekends this season where I thought he's had really good performances in qualifying, but just for one reason or another, those performances have not really carried over to the races. I think the fact that you had, Sauber had a double points finish for the first time since, I think, Mexico 2022, or it might have been 23, but quite a long time ago anyway, shows that this is a package that's been much improved since Spain, I would say. And again, not to take away from Bortoleto, he was definitely the better of the two Sauber drivers, but it's not like this is the worst car on the grid and he suddenly is, he's pulling off miracles, putting this car in 8th. But I thought, really solid job by Bortoletto. Really good job on the strategy. Could have finished 7th if he had done a little bit of a better job, going wheel to wheel with Alonso. But again, in those kinds of master and apprentice type situations, often with wheel to wheel racecraft, especially, racing a guy like Alonso, there's no shame in coming off second best there. So again, did a really good job still to bring the car home to an 8th place and his first points in Formula One. All right, number 3, driver who I think had I'm not going to say a breakout race weekend, but I think definitely a standout race weekend. I think on paper and in terms of the results, probably his best weekend in his still short F1 career, and that is Liam Lawson. Qualifies 6th, gets himself up into Q3, out-qualifies Verstappen in the Red Bull, out-qualifies Antonelli in the Mercedes. Really, really good job in qualifying, I thought. And this is kind of where we would expect on, Racing Bull's best weekends. This is kind of like their max ceiling of what we can expect for them. So I think, pretty good job done, well done there by Lawson. In terms of race, really well executed race, really good race pace, really well executed strategy, made the one-stop strategy work. And again, when you're asking a rookie driver to, make these kinds of aggressive one-stop strategies work, where it really relies on those drivers have really good tire management, again, that can be a really daunting situation for a rookie, but Lawson did a really good job. I think really highlights that. I think something that I've thought for quite a long time is that, Lawson's ability on a Sunday. I know the wheel-to-wheel racecraft is a little off, like a little aggressive, a little on the edge sometimes, but I think the raw race pace on Sunday is honestly pretty good. The qualifying one-lap pace is the real question. I think that's going to be the deciding factor of does he have a long F1 career, or is he a guy who's here for this season, maybe doesn't even get to next season, and is out kind of after a pretty short career. So I think qualifying is going to be make or break for Lawson. If he can get the qualifying to be at this level consistently, or even at 2/3 of the remaining races for the season, I think highly likely he sticks around next year. And depending on what happens with Tsunoda, he may kind of be in a fortunate situation where Red Bull only has really one driver to promote, and that's Arvid Lindblad. They don't really have a second rookie who's really on, showed enough, really has the super license points even, I believe, outside of Iwasa, but that's kind of a separate story. But where they only have to promote one driver, and again, Tsunoda's having a pretty torrid season, pretty torrid race weekend this past race. So again, that might help save Lawson's seat as well. So into the top 2 we go. Number 2, I'm going to go with Charles Leclerc. Thought really, really good, solid weekend for the Monegasque driver. Qualified 2nd, a little bit fortunate to qualify in the front row just because of the way that the end of Q3 went with Gasly's spin. But lost position at the beginning of the race to Piastri. Comes home to 3rd place, but looked really, really comfortable. Didn't look like he was being challenged by his teammate or any other drivers. Obviously the two McLarens were miles up the road, but pretty quiet weekend for him. And I thought just overall really, really solid performance. And number 1 is your race winner, Lando Norris. Gets pole position by an absolutely dominant margin. I can't remember what the exact margin is, but I think it was close to 0.4 of a second or so. So really, really good job done there by Norris. That's Verstappen-esque, as I think the race said on their headline article. But qualifying performance finally puts together a clean one. And again, the key for Norris is going to be consistency and carrying this forward every week's race weekend going forward, not once in a blue moon, once every month, once every 2 months, as we've kind of seen the last, little while. Race pace, I think, pretty good. Kept his head when he was under pressure from Piastri. He didn't crack like an egg and go off into the wall, make a bunch of silly mistakes. Although there were a couple of small mistakes here and there, like he went in the gravel at the final corner and gave Piastri a little bit of a look. But all in all, very, very solid weekend for Norris. On a track that he's historically done very, very well. So the trick for Norris is to continue this momentum forward, deliver another win in Silverstone next weekend, and then probably try to win at least one or not both of the last kind of doubleheader before summer break, which is Hungary and Belgium. So I think winning 2 of the next 3 races will be great for Piastri, or for Norris, really kind of help build momentum going into the summer break. If Piastri wins, let's say they split the races, that's basically even Stevens. Probably doesn't change the championship picture too much, assuming the other driver finishes second. But if Piastri wins next 3 races, momentum, all that momentum from this weekend completely goes away. And again, it will be all Piastri's in terms of momentum going into the summer break, which is really the last thing that Norris is going to want. I guess one good news for him is that realistically, this weekend basically killed Verstappen's title hopes. And that means that, realistically, the McLarens can afford to let their two drivers race, even if they take each other out, unless they do that, 5 or 6 times, 4 times in the remaining races. Verstappen or Russell or Leclerc are realistically not going to be able to catch them just because we've gotten past the front wing change, which was kind of the big test. Most teams have brought, their final big upgrade. Realistically, last 6 months of the season, no one's going to be bringing any big upgrades just because everyone's going to be focused on 2026. And there's no inter-team title fight, not like we had in 2021 where, Red Bull and Mercedes were developing all the way to the end because, they're in a very, very hotly contested fight. This year, the gap in McLaren is massive in terms of constructors' points already. So highly unlikely that any of the teams chasing them are really going to invest a ton of resources into the rest of the season. So I guess that's the one good news for the two McLaren drivers is that they can now afford to race each other very, very hard. And yeah, kind of a throwback to 1998 or even a throwback to kind of the Silver Wars era of 2014, 2015, 2016, where the two Mercedes drivers went, head to head for the title. So there you go. That is my power rankings for the 2025 Austrian Grand Prix. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.